Hey friend, I hope you know this is Pat Boone, and you and I are enjoying TV Confidential with my buddy Ed.
Ed Robertson, welcoming you to this week's edition of TV Confidential, radio talk show about television that will welcome back Stephanie Powers in our second hour. Stephanie Powers, the actress known around the world as Jennifer Hart on Heart to Heart. Also coming up in our second hour, we will welcome back Ray Richmond as we continue our look at the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos on television and the continuing influence The Sopranos has on the landscape of dramatic television. Stephanie Powers and Ray Richmond will join us in our second hour. We hope you stay tuned for that. Coming up later on this hour, we will welcome back our friend Steve Randisi. Steve's latest book traces the life and times of Penny Singleton. Penny Singleton, the first actress to play Blondie on the screen, which Penny did throughout the 30s and 40s as the star of the popular Blondie movie series from Columbia Pictures, while TV fans recognize Penny as the voice of Jane Jetson. Off-screen, Penny Singleton was a tireless advocate for improving the working conditions of her fellow actors, while in 1958 she made history as the first female president of an AFL-CIO union, that union being AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists. We'll talk about the life and career of Penny Singleton when Steve Randisi joins us later on in this hour. We hope you stay tuned for that as well. In the meantime, we will open up our program this week by welcoming Nick Nugent. Nick is the ultimate authority on the subject of Knight Rider. Knight Rider, the classic TV series starring David Hasselhoff, Edward Mulhare, and the voice of William Daniels, that also spawned a franchise of merchandise, including several popular video games, while also continuing to entertain audiences for more than 4 decades. Nick's book, The Knight Rider Companion, was recently updated with a lot of new information about the series. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. Nick Nugent, welcome to TV Confidential.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
You had a chance to talk to Glenn Larson several times while writing this book, both when you originally released it and when you updated it. You got to know Glenn personally. Was that as a result of the book, or did you know him before that?
I first met Glenn back in September 2005. I met his son James Larson. We worked at a production company together I worked there as an intern, and he invited me to his dad's house for a screening of the movie Serenity. Well, I thought, because Serenity was coming out in theaters that day, he's like, no, it's in my dad's house. And his last name being Larson, it connected with me. I said, is your dad Glenn Larson? He says, yeah, have you heard of him? Of course, who hasn't? So my stepdad and I, we went up there, and we met Glenn for the first time. And this is all covered in detail in my book. I'm just giving the broad strokes. We hit it off really well, and he gave me a signed copy, Season 1 box set. It was a DVD at that time, which he personalized and signed for me. And that's kind of ground zero where our relationship started. He knew I was a big fan of Knight Rider at the time, and he was working on a idea for a Knight Rider feature film to bring it to the big screen.
Had you been thinking about a Knight Rider book at the time you met Larson, or did one thing lead to another after you met him?
First, Glenn had a strong desire to want to bring Knight Rider back into the public eye in a big way, but his version of Knight Rider, because as many fans know, when he moved on to do The Fall Guy, NBC sort of steered the series into their own thing, and they did some spin-offs like Teen Knight Rider and other stuff that didn't work out too well. So he wanted to sort of start from the ground up and reintroduce the mythology of the series back to fans through a feature film. And he needed someone like me to help him kind of steer him that way. And through knowing him, I had invited him to a fan event called the Saugus Car Show back in 2008 or 2007, I think it was. And that was the first time he interacted with fans directly and really understood that there was this demand, this childhood desire to see Michael and Kit on the big screen, because it never happened before. It was only television. Due to the way rights work, though, it would have to have been different than the Universal version, because there's a distinction between television rights and movie rights.
Mm-hmm.
So, having learned all these things, I started interacting with the Knight Rider fandom itself through the internet, through some forum boards, using an alias at the time, just to kind of gather intel,
Absolutely.
On what people would like, what they wouldn't like, what they'd accept, how much you could change, what you can't change. And there's always going to be a section of fans that, if it's not David Hasselhoff behind the wheel of an 82 Trans Am with William Daniels, the voice of Kit, then they won't accept it no matter what. But the reality is actors get older, voices change, rights change, there's legal limitations, and you have to work within those parameters. But you can still get the core pieces that makes Knight Rider what Knight Rider is, instead of trying to fix what isn't broken, which a lot of these reboots and sequels and remakes try to do these days. It doesn't quite work out.
Right. The tendency, and this is particularly the case at the time when NBC tried to bring back Knight Rider as a series back in 2008.
Yes.
This was the particular fault of the man who greenlit the show at the time, but it's a mentality that permeates remakes in general over the last 20 years. The tendency is, if you have the name, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough to generate a new series and hopefully, attract new fans. But as NBC found out with the 2008 Knight Rider, it's more than just the name. And as you say in the book, it is the sum of all its parts, and you have to understand the parts and why all the parts worked if you're going to try to recreate that magic.
Well, it's more than just making a car black and putting a scanner in the grill and having it talk. You've got to have humor, heart, and soul. You've got to have Michael Knight be a lone crusader. He has to be alone to do his job. You can't have a team on the sidelines, constantly yapping in his ear on heads-up display screen where it's just busy and unrealistic, and you become very aware that you're watching a visual effect rather than getting absorbed into the story. That's what Knight Rider had going for it. It came along at a time when visual effects were in their infancy. Especially, it had no green screen or blue screen, because for television that was a very expensive option at the time. So most of what you see on Knight Rider, aside from Kit's CG graphics, which were crude at the time, vector graphics, is practical. It's real. They jumped real cars, and then when they couldn't do that anymore, they used miniatures.
Nick Nugent's on the line with us. Nick is the author of the Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, everything you wanted to know and more about the classic TV series starring David Hasselhoff, Edward Mulhare, and the voice of William Daniels, and why the original mythology of Knight Rider continues to be so special to millions of fans today. The Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, available from our friends at Black Pond Press. You can also find it at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, where books are sold online. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay Area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit FrontPorchRealtyGroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This is Irene Sue, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
You touch on something I was driving at in my previous question, Nick. At the end of the day, any television series will live or die on the strength of its characters. There's got to be something beyond the gimmick of a talking car or special effects that's going to make people tune in every week, or these days binge watch one show after another. And at the end of the day, and you really get the sense of this when you read Nick's book, folks, because he talked to everybody conceivably who was involved creatively in the production of that show. It was a show about a character that happened to be a car.
Yes. Well, William Daniels was essentially the soul of the car, and the car was a costume, but it was a character. And a lot of that credit goes to David Hasselhoff for making us believe a car can talk just as much as Richard Donner made us believe a man can fly with Superman.
That's right.
To answer your earlier question, how I got involved with writing the book in particular is I met a couple fans who had put a book out before, and their approach was more of the story of Knight Rider, and I felt like, okay, that book has been done. Then I got into a position to help them re-release their book for an anniversary edition. It was called Knight Rider Legacy. I did the cover art for it, and then for one reason or another, they kind of fell apart. And then I found myself in a position to put out a Knight Rider book myself. Well, at the time, I love Knight Rider. I've loved Knight Rider since I was a little kid, but it hasn't always been a part of my life. I saw it when I was a kid, and then I moved on to other things after it was canceled, and found myself going full circle when I met Glenn again. It reawakened all of those wholesome, iconic childhood memories of watching the show on TV in syndication, because I was born a little too young to see it when it first aired. And I wanted to give it the best visual presentation I could, and there was no Knight Rider book out there at the time that captured the visual language of the show, the designs, the press photos, the promotional material, a detailed episode guide that went beneath the surface of just what the episode is, and his interaction with the cast and crew beyond the principal cast to writers and producers and directors, so you could really understand how many people it took to bring this show together and why it went the distance from one executive producer to the next, from Glenn to Robert Foster. It was a team effort,
It was very much a team effort because, as you just alluded to and as you point out in detail in the Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, Nick, it's one of the last shows with the Glenn Larson imprimatur, but because of circumstances, he was only directly involved in the pilot and in a supervisory capacity in the first 13 shows because, as you mentioned earlier, he was already under contract with Fall Guy at another studio.
Yes. Well, as I understand it, Knight Rider was his last commitment to Universal before he went to Fox to do Fall Guy.
Say what you will about Glenn Larson, and there are a lot of people have plenty to say about Glenn Larson.
There are varying opinions about Glenn, that's for sure.
Yes, but I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for our conversation today, and the man had a knack, a couple of things. He had a pulse on what the public wanted, which not everybody, not every successful producer has. I mean, he was very much in step with what the public wanted, and he had a knack for taking concepts that may not have been his originally, but he developed them into whole different properties that caught on with the public and had successful lives in their own right.
The word I used to describe Glenn is visionary. He was well ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He didn't look at just what the world was going to be like, a year or two down the line. He was looking at 5 years, 10 years into the distant future from the past, with Battlestar Galactica, which predates Star Wars, So, I mean, he was not afraid to dream and to aim high.
Even a show like McCloud, which, on its face was quote unquote, another gimmick show from the 70s in an era where every detective show had to have some sort of gimmick to it. Yet he took that one-note premise and developed it into a show that lasted 7 seasons. And if you were to watch McCloud in its entirety, as I recently did, that show holds up. And that goes back to Glenn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the stories that Glenn were telling were things that people could relate to, and they always had a strong moral fiber to them, which I think comes from his Mormon background. Which reminds me a lot of like Aesop's fables, cautionary tales, where it's like your hero isn't always heroic. Sometimes your hero makes mistakes, and then they learn from those mistakes and grow stronger from it. Life lessons that resonate with you. And in my case, my mother married several times, and I didn't have a stable father figure. So Michael Knight was my father figure. I was a latchkey kid growing up most of the time. While she worked, I had to take care of myself, and my father figure became Michael Knight. And I learned many valuable lessons from the series. It went beyond just, the action of the car crashing through walls and repelling gunfire, and that's all good and everything. But the meat of those stories is what resonates, because it gives you an exposure into some of the realities of the real world and how to encounter and fight with a positive voice, with a positive choice.
The Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition by Nick Nugent includes new and updated interviews with series creator Glenn Larson, series stars David Hasselhoff, William Daniels, Rebecca Holden, and many, many other key personnel from the NBC series. It also holds a newly updated Hall of Fame autograph guide, a vehicle states guide, a Knight Rider fonts guide, a Knight Rider logos guide, Knight equipment guide, the ultimate kit functions list, a section in which we talk to Kit, the complete an episode guide for all 4 seasons, several pages of one-of-a-kind artwork created exclusively for the book, and a whole lot more. The Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, available from our friends at Black Pond Press. You can also find it Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, where books are sold online. You touch on another, listening to you talk about why watching Knight Rider touched you personally as a kid, Nick. It's to another part of the vision of Glenn Larson, in that, as you talk about in the book, he was commissioned with doing an 8 p.m. action-adventure series that was child-friendly, which is a contradiction in and of itself in many respects, and yet he managed to create a show that attracted the adults and yet was able to connect with kids without talking down with them.
Oh, yeah. The nice thing about Knight Rider for me is that it was diverse and inclusive before it became buzzwords today. It understood its audience. It never excluded anybody. And one of the catchphrases or taglines that I use for my books, the Knight Rider Companion and Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, is one fan can make a difference. I say fan because a fan can be anyone, regardless of race, gender, age, beliefs,
or profession, because a lot of industry people continue to follow the show, and in many respects, they became involved in the entertainment industry as a result of watching shows like Knight Rider. So it sparks a lot of interest.
Well, I mean, Knight Rider, let's look at KITT, the supercar of tomorrow, some of the features like auto cruise and video screens and satellite phone calls, and these are features that you can find in cars today. But back in the 80s, this was as far ahead of its time. But Knight Rider definitely influenced the evolution of automotive technology. In fact, Elon Musk had a Knight Rider car at a unveiling for his cyber van and robot. I forget what they're called. Optimus, I think. So that just goes to show you that 42 years later, after the series, ended, it still resonates with adults today, not just kids. I mean, the kids have grown up to have kids of their own, and they're showing Knight Rider to their kids and then to their kids. So it has a generational quality to it that is timeless. And I think one of the greatest strengths of Knight Rider is it gives you the illusion of a shadowy flight of in a real world, but it is at its core escapist entertainment, and you can watch it any time you need to escape from your problems, or if you feel sad or whatever might be going on in your life. You can kick back and ride shotgun with Michael and Kit and go on an adventure. And I think it's vitally important to have good, strong escapist entertainment instead of just being bombarded by negativity all the time.
Nick Nugent is on the line with us. Nick Nugent, author of the Knight Rider Companion, abridged edition, everything you wanted to know and more about the classic TV series starring David Hasselhoff, Edward Mulhare, and the voice of William Daniels, that also tells you why the original mythology of Knight Rider continues to be special to millions of fans today. The Knight Rider Companion Abridged Edition, available from our friends at Black Pond Press. You can also find it at Amazon.com, BarnesNoble.com, wherever books are sold online. Nick will be back for part 2 of our conversation in a few weeks here on TV Confidential. In the meantime, we'll take a quick time out, then Steve Randisi will join us right after this. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please consider subscribing to the TV Confidential podcast, or better yet, give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or wherever you listen to our podcast.
Do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Are you being audited or investigated? Has the IRS sent you a letter demanding payment? You may not owe what they claim. Make this free call to the tax doctor now. Let them negotiate with the IRS on your behalf.
800-239-0201. 800-239-0201. That's 800-239-0201.